Wow, guys. Another episode having to do with background ponies and just so shortly after Slice of Life. Seriously, I think I'm actually, well, I don't know if I was more excited for this than for Slice of Life, but when I heard about this episode, I was excited because guess what? Background character development, again, but this time, it doesn't have much to do with fan theory. This time we get so many new things about these minor characters that we're barely ever seen. As an analyst, well, if I can even call myself an analyst at this point, I am drowning in all of this new information. I don't know, I feel so rich in information. I knew that unlike Slice of Life, this would give us a lot of new information that we didn't know about these characters. Minuet, or Colgate as the fans like to call her, actually has a character. She was the one that was most focused on aside from Moondancer. But geez, wow, I am getting ahead of myself. Let's just start from the beginning. In fact, I think I'm kind of forced to make a bullet point list this time around because I have so much to say and I don't want to miss anything or have to backtrack. And for all of you who've been watching my videos for a while or have at least seen my introduction video, you should know that my videos are unscripted, so they can be a little bit unorganized here and there. It seems like after actually making a bullet point list, it's much longer than I expected, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so I didn't really have too many first impressions because, well, there weren't promo videos for this one as far as I know. My assumption was actually that the map would say that she was needed in Canterlot and she would wonder why. And then she would figure out that she was needed to, well, make amends with her friends. In fact, that could have been easily done and might have made the episode better by a tiny bit. At the same time, her going there of her own accord was also a really great idea, and I'm not sure, at the same time, which idea I like better. But the one thing that I was really excited for is the same thing that I was excited for with Slice of Life, only this time I actually got it. My hopes were fulfilled, which is that we would get character development for background characters. Slice of Life included almost pure fan content that we already expected, so we didn't really discover anything new per se. But since these characters are less popular, now there's more character development that we didn't make, things that we really didn't know, and things that we can add to our fanfictions, and oh, it's just so juicy, all of it. This episode is full of it. Alright, so before I start talking about the plot and everything, let's just get a few things out of the way first. First off, we have lots of continuity. This includes the Predictions and Prophecies book from Season 1, Episode 1, Moondancer's messed up gift, the donut place where they went after the gala, mention of Look Before You Sleep and Slumber 101, and mention of Minuet being one of Cadence's bridesmaids. This entire episode in general is continuity. Even down to the point that they said that Lyra lives in Ponyville, even though she used to be in Canterlot. I was wondering what they were going to say about that. I was thinking, Lyra Heartstrings, is she going to be in Canterlot? Are they really going to say, after Slice of Life, knowing that she lives in Ponyville, that she actually lives in Canterlot? But it seems like they actually covered that. Another thing I'm going to get out of the way is the world information that we have, the news stuff. We got to see their old science lab. By the way, we have Philly Amethyst Star in there, if it means anything. We get more world building and lore building, like about this random pony named Haycart. I guess he has a method of going into a book using magic for studying purposes or something. Apparently he's a genius and Twilight has a copy of his treatise on ponies. And we also got to hear about another part of probably lore, or a fairy tale, but it's probably lore, the life and times of Mirari the Mainless. He sounds like a bald pony. And I'm also going to point out a few observations that I have, like for example, for a while it seemed like a majority of the Canterlot ponies were unicorns, but for some reason most ponies that we saw in the library seemed to be either Earth ponies or Pegasi. Make of that what you will. Now we're going to actually move on to the brunt of the episode, like Twilight's concerns, which is why the episode exists. So through the episode, it's pretty much assumed that Twilight just feels bad about how she treated her friends and felt like she wanted to make up for things, but it also partly felt like she was taking the situation almost like she would take a test, seeming to care more about, not failing than she actually did about her friends' feelings in general. So that's one thing that I noticed. And even if this wasn't the case, and due to how this is written, I don't really think this was the case, I highly doubt that was the writer's intentions for it to be, but it did feel like that from time to time throughout the episode. Like maybe her intent wasn't necessarily to make her friends feel better, but just simply to ace the test, as it were. I don't know, it just felt like that sometimes, and to be honest, that might actually be half of what was going on. Just some food for thought. And speaking of Twilight's friends, man did they get development. I mean, compared to what we had before anyway. I can actually analyze Minuet just a little bit, but I'm gonna get to that after the others, since hers is the longest explanation. So, first of all, just addressing all of them as a group at once. First, we found out so much information. We found out they all attended the coronation. We found out that they were friends since they were fillies. They visit Ponyville often to visit Lyra, and Lyra visits them. All of them seem very stereotypical, but I'll get to that later. And apparently it hurt them a little bit when Twilight left without saying goodbye, but they were used to it, so they didn't take it personally. And apparently, according to Twilight, they actually did miss Moondancer all that time, which is part of something else that I'll get to later. So, to be honest, Lemon Hearts and Twinkleshine, the poor things, they didn't really get much character development at all. They didn't speak very often, and when they did, it seemed like it was just because it was necessary for some pony to say something, and they didn't want to use Minuet all the time. So unfortunately, their personalities did seem a bit bland, which is once again something I'll get to later, but we did get a couple tidbits of information about them. Lemonheart's voice is slightly higher than Twinkleshine's, and her personality seems to be more of the quiet type or the kind type than the other two. And apparently she works at the Canterlot Palace. Quote,
yeah, it's true. I do the big events mostly. State dinners, that sort of thing.
As for Twinkleshine, we pretty much don't know much about her. She just seems a little more practical than the other two, and apparently she spit out her oats when she heard the news about Twilight. That's about it. We even got to hear a little bit more about Lyra, knowing that Lyra was one of Twilight's old friends back in Canterlot, and used to live there based on that lab scene, and of course still visits Canterlot now and again. I was kind of hoping that Lyra would actually be in this episode, but it's okay that she wasn't. The episode is just fine as it is. Now for Minuet. First of all, it's obvious that they weren't going to use Colgate as her name due to copyright issues, and Minuet has been her official name for a while, so I have absolutely no complaints. In fact, Minuet sounds like a nice name. We got to see her house, which is covered in hourglass shapes. Her personality seems really outgoing. Actually, she reminded me of a stereotypical mall-dwelling girl for a while. But at the same time, I almost feel like if I had to choose background characters to replace all of the elements of harmony, part of me would want to make Minuet the element of laughter or something. I mean, while she isn't all that funny, she's extremely optimistic, almost to the point of purposeful ignorance. In fact, that's exactly what I was about to get to. Actually, this portion is probably going to be partly scripted because I had so much to say I had to write it down. So to begin with, as I said, she almost seems too optimistic. I mean, it could just be her being stupid, honestly. Or a little bit ditzy. I mean, that's probably what their intention was. But to dig deeper into it, here's another idea. Minuet almost seemed like a good candidate for a citizen of our town, in that her optimism almost reeked of being in denial about something sometimes. Being too happy in the face of a problem and trying to put problems behind her. For example, this scene.
I'm trying to study. It's us, your old friends. Ugh. That's old Moon Dancer, all right. She always did like her books. Hey, kind of like you used to be, huh?
So as I said, even in the face of a problem, she seems just too happy. Maybe because she likes to stick her head in the sand and would rather remain ignorant to bad things, preferring not to know at all. I've seen lots of people like that, you know, preferring to take the blue pill rather than the red pill all the time, if you know what I mean. Those who don't know that reference, it's basically the idea that you're purposely choosing to be ignorant and not worry about something terrible going on right under your nose because you'd rather be oblivious to it to prevent an overload of stress. Basically, people who are the embodiment of the phrase, ignorance is bliss. And I've heard of plenty of these people in the past. If you pay attention, you'll find out that they're not really all that uncommon. Now, why Minuet is like this, I have no idea. Maybe she has problems handling stress. Maybe she's easily stressed out. Who knows? But it's just something to take into account as an analysis of her character from what we have. Now, an even bigger subject would be Moon Dancer. So what we know about her is that she used to go to school with them. She was apparently very similar to Twilight. She lives out by the stadium, wherever that is. She's very introverted and apparently has been shy, and she likes to study just for the sake of knowledge. And so near the end of the video, I was actually going to mention some things that I felt maybe could have been improved upon in this episode, and I still will, but I'm going to have to spoil one of them now. And this thing is that there's this impression that Twilight is possibly Moon Dancer's closest friend, or at least someone that she looks up to, or something like that. But that fact was never really mentioned directly. It was just kind of looming over our heads. There was kind of this feel that Twilight was more important to Moon Dancer than we originally thought, but not only do we never hear why, we don't hear any mention of it at all. I mean, unless you want to count Moon Dancer's freak out near the end as a mention. It hinted at it, and it implied it, but no one really said the words, "You were my best friend," or "I looked up to you," or "We were so similar," or anything like that. I mean, Twilight once said that that was exactly like how she used to act, but aside from that, we didn't really get to hear much. I would have liked to hear Twilight say to Moon Dancer, "Hey, I used to be a lot like you. In fact, we are very similar. The one difference between you and me is, guess what? I discovered the magic of friendship." But she didn't exactly say that. The most that she said on the subject was that a wise pony told her that there was more to life than books. But beyond that, she didn't say much about Moondancer's similarities to her and try to relate to her. Anyway, my point of this whole thing was to say that even though it wasn't directly mentioned, we all know that it seemed like Twilight was really valued by Moondancer. So I'm just going to point out all the proof of that, even though we all know it. First of all, Moondancer apparently gave Twilight a first edition of Principles of Magic, and she was upset that Twilight left it behind because it implied that it didn't mean much to her. Also, Twilight feels like she was the cause of the party being ruined, as though her presence was that important, and Moondancer confirms this herself by saying it wasn't the first time that she put herself out there, and then Twilight didn't even bother to show up, and then she even says that she left town without saying goodbye, even though they were supposed to be friends, and obviously all of these things hurt Moondancer. Also, even though 3 other ponies showed up, just because Twilight wasn't there, she was humiliated and felt like she wasn't important and was extremely hurt. This wouldn't have happened with any random acquaintance. She also said that the other 3 finally convinced her that she had value, and that other ponies might like her and might want to be her friend, and so perhaps she knew those 3 before Twilight. She knew them beforehand, and they convinced her of those things, so she tried to make friends, and Twilight might have been the first time she actually tried opening up to some pony, and then that first attempt was shattered. Just an idea, but it would make a lot of sense. I mean, think about it. What if Minuet and Twinkleshine and Lemonhearts all knew Moondancer back then? And maybe they weren't the closest of friends, but they knew her well enough to say, hey, you're important too, ponies can be friends with you, ponies can like you, you should go try it out. And then I can imagine that she thinks of Twilight because Twilight and her are so similar. Wow, another pony that's so similar with me, maybe I'll try making friends with her. Maybe I'll try opening up. Let's invite her to my party, and we'll invite the ponies who suggested this as well, obviously. And then all 3 ponies show up, but Twilight's not there. Her first time really trying to get close to some pony, and then she doesn't. It just doesn't work out. She was hurt. She was heartbroken. She was very upset. That is my reasoning behind why Twilight seems so important. It's my reasoning behind why the other 3 showing up wasn't enough for her, and that Twilight's presence was so important that just by that one pony not showing up, she was that hurt. I think my theory's not all that bad, to be honest. Another fantastic thing about the episode is that the feels were so strong in this one. This is what I was talking about just in my last review. An extra tear or a few extra sad lines can make all the difference in the world. When the tears were welling up in Twilight's eyes after she saw Moondancer walk away, that was intense. And if we didn't see those tears slowly welling up in her eyes, the scene would not have felt as feely, And the emotion in Moondancer's voice was so amazing when she told Twilight off, and the tears didn't stop coming when Moondancer was crying. This is an example of the fact that a couple extra sad lines, a couple extra dramatic lines, and some more tears really do make a difference. It seemed like a while back they were being really careful with when to add tears because they didn't want to make it too sad because it's a little girls show and they didn't want to hurt children or something. But it seems like in this episode they just put tears in wherever they were needed without as much hesitation. That is one of the ways that this episode really did shine. I felt things in this episode. I felt feelings that I should feel. I'm sure a lot of us had our heartstrings tugged even a little bit during the episode. But with as much praise as I'm giving this episode, I wouldn't be able to call myself an analyst if I didn't look at both the highs and lows of each episode. I don't like to pick sides and say, well, this episode was amazing and therefore I'm not going to tell you anything bad about it. Regardless of the fact that I liked the episode and regardless of the fact that I've seen a lot of positive reactions over it, just like every other episode, it still has its flaws, and in order to be completely fair to both sides, I will be pointing them out. But before that, this was hilarious.
I'm sorry I skipped your party.
Also, this next scene is definitely me. I can relate so heavily to this.
Oh my gosh! Moondancer? Is that... Shh!
Anyway, here are some things in the episode that could be improved. First of all, I already mentioned that there was an impression of Twilight possibly being Moondancer's closest friend, or, having some value to Moondancer, and yet we never really saw why, or how, or heard much of it. And while it's fun to make our own theories, we shouldn't really have to in this situation. It kind of seemed strange that Moondancer valued Twilight more than every pony else, and we never got a direct answer as to why. And Twilight says Moondancer was just as she used to be, which is a fantastic plot point, but again, she doesn't directly say, I used to be just like you, but now look. She doesn't really say it to her even once, it's just implied. Another problem is that Minuet, Twinkleshine, and Lemonhearts were just too bland as characters. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I would say that all three of them shared the exact same personality, or at the very least, Twinkleshine and Lemonheart's. Minuet was a lot more outgoing and happy all the time and stuff like that, so you could tell that she was different from the other two in that way. But, I mean, Twinkleshine and Lemonheart's, it seems like M.A. Larson didn't really make an effort to make them different from each other. It seems like he just really made them stereotypical characters and didn't delve too much into anything about them, really. I mean, aside from knowing that Lemonheart's works at the Canterlot Palace. The only thing that I can say if I were to try to make the three different from each other is Minuet is the ditzy talkative one, Lemonheart's is the quiet kind one, and Twinkleshine is the practical one. But even then, Lemonheart's and Twinkleshine seem to act almost the same most of the time. Seriously, maybe I'd just put all three of them in our town for a while. I think with an equal cutie mark and different hairstyles, they'd blend in really well, especially Minuet. So while I am happy that we got to see these characters and develop more about them, at the same time, I do wish that they had more personality to them. Another thing is that Moondancer is just a recolor of Twilight. Personally, I mean, I actually saw speculation about this saying that maybe it implies that, you know, maybe Moondancer looked up to Twilight or she was her rival or something like that. I don't know why rivals would share the same haircut, but anyway. It would be another implication that she looked up to Twilight enough to copy her mane style. But in all reality, I think a more unique mane and tail design would have been appreciated. I mean, granted, she had her hair in that updo thing all the time, but you could plainly see that she's a Twilight recolor the moment she lets down her hair. And the last thing that I have to say that's more negative about this episode is that I know that Twilight doesn't remember her friends well due to having her face in a book all the time, but seriously, it gets borderline amnesia sometimes. I mean, I can see in the beginning where she doesn't remember their names, but all of a sudden she's forgetting her own life experiences. I think it's mainly that moment when she says, "I've never had you over?" I mean, you'd think that while she's by herself, supposedly not living with her parents, and her only life exists in a book, unique experiences like inviting a friend over would be remembered. Or, I guess, lack thereof in this situation. Sometimes it just kind of felt like she wasn't just being forgetful, but she had a complete memory wipe or something. Anyway, aside from those things though, I think the episode was pretty solid. It was structured fantastically. We got character development, we got world building, we got a tiny bit of lore building, or history building, or whatever it is. You know, the information about Haycart's method, the whole book spell thing, Mirari the Maneless. And I know Slice of Life was a fun episode, but to be honest, I was hoping Slice of Life would be a lot more like this episode, showing quite a few background characters in the main screen, but having good structure and having good writing. I know Slice of Life was supposed to be an all-out party type of thing, as I keep calling it, but to be honest, if it was gone about more like this episode was gone about, I think it would have been a lot better. It would have been exciting for everyone without having to randomly pull out a whole bunch of circus tricks to get it to work. But enough about Slice of Life. Amending Fences was fantastic. It was everything that I wish that Slice of Life could have been. And overall, I'm very happy that it aired. Comment away, guys. I'm totally open to hearing all of your opinions. In fact, I'm very interested in hearing your opinions on this. Also, sorry for the long video, I had a lot to say. Here's to hoping that next week's episode will be up to par with this one.